Day 385 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And first of all, we'll head over to those Russian military losses. And currently, Russia is sitting on 161,520 military personnel losses there, with almost 1,000 losses recorded in the past 24 hours alone. Not to mention the 160k milestone that Russia recently hit as well. Then for the hardware losses, 8 tanks, 10 APVs, 9 artillery, and 2 air defense systems, which is truly a critical loss. Then we'll move across to the map, where, speaking of Russian air defense systems, not only is Russia losing them on the battlefield, but they're also expending this valuable and limited resource in the capital of Moscow itself. Now, for this instance, most recently, Russia added an additional 5 of these into the mix. And there were more reported as being deployed just a couple of days earlier as well. It's getting hard to actually keep up with the news on this front. And it appears paranoid Putin himself has clearly gotten wind of Ukraine's new drone production capabilities now. Then also in Russia, and in this short video, we see Russia launch 2 missiles from the Belgorod region. And the first, which good to know for Russia that it wasn't armed with a nuclear warhead, failed and crash landed mere yards away basically from its launch location. And so the governor of Belgorod put out a statement 12 hours ago saying 3 missiles were shot down over Belgorod and debris hit residential houses and there was damage involved. I mean, that's halfway accurate to a description. Then moving across to the Donbass, so the armed forces of Ukraine have announced they decided to stay in Bakhmut, citing the location is of pretty critical importance to defend the remainder of the Donbass front lines. But taking a look at the cancerous growth that is the Russian and Wagner forces around Bakhmut at the moment, it's fair to say they appear to be closing in somewhat. But from a military objective standpoint, for Ukraine that is, this place is a Russian kill box, pure and simple. As harsh as that is to say where Russian forces are concerned. But every action continues to be critical for Ukraine right now, as they keep saying, as they like to stop the zombie apocalypse right here. Then we'll move down to Vuhledar, and so even further south. So 2 more Russian main battle tanks eliminated near Vuhledar from the minefields. This time it was a T-72 tank and a T-80 tank. Now this is just a still of a video that I prefer to show the still for this time because it allows you to look closely with a bit of extra detail. And once again, we can see the tanks' turrets popped off, both of the tanks. So as it turns out, most Russian tanks have a flaw in their design. The ammunition and their feeder are not safely separated in a compartmentalized way from the rest of the tank with any sufficient armor. And that's why we have the turret tossing competition memes you've probably seen before. Oh, and a Russian BTR-82 APC, so Armored Personnel Carrier, also decided to test Minefield City in the same region, with unfortunate consequences. These guys are simply ill-trained and ill-equipped. It's rather the embarrassment. They need mine clearers, unless of course they are the mine clearers themselves. Then somewhere else in the east, the Ukrainian forces shot down an Su-24 near the front lines. And this time, the parachute worked. Now, it's normally an Su-25 that Ukraine shoots down. But this time, you could arguably say it's the older variant. And it is plausible that Russia is running low on the Su-25s. the ground attack aircraft, and has followed up with deploying the older and less capable Su-24s that are actually not even really designed for close ground support like the Su-25s are, but theoretically could be used as such, particularly if those Su-25s are in short supply for the Russian forces, which is absolutely possible. Then we'll move across to the biggest news of the day, probably all week, that a US MQ-9 Reaper that was flying in international airspace in the Black Sea was downed after an incident involving a Russian Su-27 fighter jet. Now, from the Russian side, the Russian MOD said, so that's the Ministry of Defense, they said the US drone just fell down and crashed into the sea all on its own. But the US, in contrast, said that the Russian jet had a brief close contact flyby with the drone's propeller, followed by the Russian jet dumping fuel on the drone and I believe the propeller there as well, thus downing the US aircraft. Interesting. So who's telling the truth? Well, time will tell, especially as more footage becomes available, but I've been following these incidents for years, in fact, where typically Russian jets perform very close by and reckless maneuvers right beside the US jets, in the typical Russian mafia bullion style. So Russia really has quite the history of performing this sort of a stunt. And so the Russian jet responsible came from the occupied Crimean Belbek airbase. And if we are to zoom in, we'll find that one near Sevastopol. So we'll click on it. There we go, Belbek Airport. Converted from civilian to military in 2014 when Russia started occupying the peninsula. I'm not laughing at the occupation either. I'm just laughing at the fact that Russia just loves to take what it can and what it wants. And so anyway, looking at this objectively, it's a pretty significant international incident in international airspace as well, tantamount to a direct attack on the US. It could be considered as. And the moral of the story is the US is likely to retaliate, probably indirectly, as they continue to provide additional arms support for Ukraine, likely pushing forward the speed at which Ukraine receives long-range missiles and missile platforms to probably lay waste to Russia's Belbek military airbase. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So let's see. So this one is more of an older new piece, but I find it quite interesting. So NATO tanks in the battle space will likely be quite effective. Take the UK's Challenger 2 tanks, for instance, that will be coming to Ukraine there. When deployed in Iraq some years back, there were no Challenger tank losses that were suffered. And the next closest situation to that was after a Challenger 2 was hit by 14 RPGs from close range, but also a Milan ATGM, so an anti-tank guided missile. Now, first of all, the tank and crew survived, the tracks and the optics were damaged on the tank, but it was operational again within just 6 hours. And I mean, these Behemoths and other NATO tanks just have some amazing armor. In fact, up to 20 tons more armor than your standard or really any Russian tank. It's just impressive. Now, alone, they're still not that useful, but as part of a wider tank brigade with all of the necessary additional vehicles like the infantry fighting vehicles and the infantry themselves, these tanks are really going to be some sort of a game changer. Then moving across to some other news. So in what I personally consider some important news, and a little bit funny too, so due to a whole bunch of Russian military hardware shortages, as we well know, Putin recently made a presidential decree for the Russian Ministry of Trade and Industry to bypass the authority of managers of defense industries if they fail to meet production goals, which basically means the Russian government could take over the management of the defense industries in an effort to make them more efficient. Put another way, they'd turn it into a nationalized defense company, because forcing a private company to be publicly operated has always led to efficiency, innovation, and specialization. Note the sarcasm though with those last remarks. Then in another Russian military mobilization blunder. So today we have something a little bit different for Russian mobilized soldiers that are not looking to die unnecessarily, really. Making a real different kind of a plea. So these soldiers are asking Putin to provide medicine and doctors for their tularemia infected comrades. So Russia is now dealing with the plague, or at least something just as ancient and similar to it. Anyway, now there's been a few recent reports on this as a result of the squalid conditions Russian soldiers have had to deal with. And the thing is, it's easily treated by antibiotics most of the time, but Russia is clearly not helping their own. Oh, and just to note, tularemia doesn't cause black eyes, which for some reason most of these guys have. Maybe from some frontline actions, that or Russian conscripts are still taking a beating from their commanding officers. I just don't know. Then in some quick funnies to round it off with today, guys. I'm pretty tired and doing my best here, mixing up my words. So Putler himself recently said that the USA continues to occupy Germany since World War II as a military occupation. And I've got to say, I have a couple of buddies in Germany that would probably not agree with that, or probably the rest of the world for that matter. But almost unrelated to this Putin picture is got to be super versatile and pure comedic gold. It's just begging for some future memification, don't you agree? Then in a final real quick funny to round it off with, I've got so more, but I'll have to leave it at this one today. So it was recently reported that Russia started deploying its ancient BTR-50 APCs, armored personnel carriers, to the front lines, and I mentioned it briefly in a previous video, but now we've come across a real photo of one of these bad boys. Now, designed in the 50s, and some reports suggest that Russia was able to muster up about 60 of these, potentially from old Soviet warehouses. Now, there was probably 1,000 located in those said warehouses, and they were able to milk out just a measly 60 or so. Looks like Russia is saving its best equipment for last. And I guess, as it turns out, Russia doesn't want to quit gracefully. They'd rather continue pulling out older and older hardware, desperately trying to maintain their military presence and assert their power, even if it means sacrificing modern capabilities. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit the like button. Like I said, not the biggest or brightest video today, not exactly my finest hour, struggling to speak, but hey, it is what it is. I've got so many more things to show you guys, mostly funnies, so many mobilization blunders, difficult to keep up with almost, and a bit of a few funny, interesting, cool news pieces as well. So certainly I'll get to most of them in the next few days or so. But yeah, thanks for all of your time. I'm sure I'll see you tomorrow, and I do hope to see you all in the next one. Cheers.